We have a private Federal Reserve that operates without any real public oversight. Now, that might sound like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually a well-documented fact. The Fed, as it's commonly known, is not a government agency, as most people assume under this system. Private banks are legally permitted to lend out far more money than they actually hold in reserves, often 10 times or more. When a bank issues a loan, it doesn't lend existing money, but creates new money as debt. Almost all the money out there is owed back to banks with interest. This legalized high finance coup ever come to be? Banks are allowed to lend out 90% of their deposits minus reserves. So if I put $100 into my bank, they can lend 90% of that out, creating new debt and effectively new money. Now, you might say, well, technically, they own the money that your government uses, which gives them total control over your economy. But contrary to what the name suggests, it is not federal and it's definitely not run by the government. Instead, it's a member-owned cartel of private banks. When you get a loan from a bank, they don't lend you actual money. Instead, they simply create new money and put it into your account as a debt. Small businesses are the backbone of the economy, driving innovation and competition. The Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, Bank of England, etc. are private banking cartels that effectively own the money that governments use. They set interest rates and money supply, which gives them total control over economies without public oversight. By design, this ensures that wealth flows upward to bankers, hedge funds, and politically connected corporations. They also rig the game so they win every time. Every so often, there's a financial crisis like 2008, where these institutions engineer a controlled demolition of the market. They short the housing market, bundle the toxic loans into mortgage-backed securities, and sell them to investors while profiting from both sides of the trade. Then they get bailed out with taxpayer money while the people suffer the consequences of their greed. Eventually, this system will end in a neo-feudalist economy where the masses are kept as perpetual renters. Small ownership is extinct and all real power lies with an unaccountable financial oligarchy. But banks prefer lending to large corporations and wealthy clients because they're seen as less risky. It ensures that the people remain in debt. Small businesses are crushed and economic power stays concentrated among the banking elite. The only way to break this cycle is through decentralized alternatives like Bitcoin, gold, or decentralized finance, and abolishing the private central banking monopoly that enslaves the world in perpetual debt. Small businesses face high-interest loans, stringent collateral requirements, and credit crunches during downturns. For example, in 2020, big banks received 10% of their loans as emergency grants, but only 5% of small business loans were granted as emergency loans. Nearly half of small businesses failed within 2 years of getting a loan. This allows mega corporations, often backed by the same financial institutions, to buy up assets at fire sale prices and further monopolize industries. In other words, every time you take out a loan, you make the bank richer and yourself poorer. Because now you owe the bank more money than you have, and you are forced to compete for scarce resources with everyone else who also owes the bank money. It's a rigged game where most people will lose. These private banks pay the Fed up to 6% interest on the money they lend it. But then they turn around and charge the government 5.3% interest on the money they borrow from it. That's a 70% profit margin on the transaction, and they don't even have to lend any actual money. They just create numbers on their computer screens and pocket the difference. They can pull strings to benefit themselves and get you to foot the bill, and it's all perfectly legal. Let me explain. Well, what's wrong with that? And it's no accident. Was designed this way on purpose to enslave the population to debt, crush small businesses, and concentrate wealth and control into the hands of a financial elite. Inflation caused by endless money printing erodes purchasing power, so people must borrow just to survive. And when they can't repay their loans, they default, lose their homes and their assets, and remain trapped in financial servitude. After all, Isn't money just a representation of value anyway? Then, isn't debt just another form of money owed back with interest? Sure, in some sense. But the problem arises when you realize nearly all the money out there is not held by people like you and me, but is owed back to banks with interest. That means we are all competing for a limited supply of actual currency. Many will inevitably default, losing their assets and remaining trapped in servitude. Well, this artificial scarcity drives up prices, causing inflation. Fractional reserve banking is not a neutral tool but a weapon of financial control. It ensures that the people remain in debt, small businesses are crushed, and economic power stays centralized among the banking elite. The only way to break this cycle is by embracing decentralized alternatives like Bitcoin, gold or decentralized finance, and by abolishing the private central banking monopoly that enslaves the world in perpetual debt. So we need to keep borrowing just to maintain our standard of living, let alone improve it. It's a vicious cycle of debt and dependence that keeps us enslaved. The story begins in the early 1900s. Prior to that time, banking was handled by individual institutions that took deposits and made loans. But the total amount of money in circulation was limited by the amount of precious metals held by the Treasury. However, that changed with the creation of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, which established a central bank, essentially a cartel of private banks given the power to create our money out of thin air through a process called fractional reserve banking. Since the interest itself is never created in the original loan, borrowers must compete for limited currency, ensuring that many will default, lose their assets, and remain in financial servitude. Mortgages, student loans, and credit cards keep individuals chained to the system, while inflation, caused by endless money printing, erodes purchasing power, forcing people to borrow even more just to survive. But a cartel of private banks granted a legal monopoly on creating our money and setting economic policy. I recommend a breakdown on how to do exactly that, including alternative financial solutions. But these are systematically suffocated under this system. Banks prefer lending to large corporations and wealthy clients because they are seen as less risky. And its global counterparts, the ECB, Bank of England, etc., control money supply, interest rates, and economic policy without public oversight. By design, this ensures that wealth flows upward to bankers, hedge funds, and politically connected corporations. And when these institutions overextend themselves and cause financial crises, like 2008, for example, these crises are not accidents, but controlled demolitions where the elite buy distressed assets, while the public bails them out. The end game is a neo-feudalist economy where the masses are perpetual renters. Small ownership is extinct, and all real power lies with an unaccountable financial oligarchy. Small businesses face high-interest loans, stringent collateral requirements, and credit crunches during downturns, pushing many into bankruptcy. This allows mega corporations, often backed by the same financial institutions, to buy up assets at fire sale prices, further monopolizing industries. And its mandate is, quite frankly, nefarious. You see, the modern fractional reserve banking system is a mechanism designed to perpetuate debt slavery, stifle small businesses, and concentrate economic control into the hands of a financial elite. Meanwhile, the debt burden is shifted onto the backs of small mom-and-pop businesses, which are the backbone of any thriving economy. At the same time, the Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel. So how did this system? Under this system, what's more? If you want to opt out of this system, in conclusion, would you like a breakdown on how to opt out of this system or alternative financial solutions? Let me know in the comments below. Did you know there is a private cartel that literally owns your country? The United States has a private Federal Reserve, which is a central bank that controls the supply of money and sets interest rates. Now, you might think that's crazy, but this is exactly how our current fractional reserve banking system works. First, let's look at how this system enslaves the people to debt. Mortgages, student loans, and credit cards keep people chained to this system. Second, this system is designed to crush small businesses and concentrate corporate power. Third, This system centralizes wealth and control. In conclusion, the private Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking in general is not a neutral tool, but a weapon of financial control. Do you like a breakdown on how to opt out of this system or alternative financial solutions? Comment below. Your input matters. Stay tuned for more.